Welcome to this short video looking at a few Belper stories. There are so many great stories about Belper, it's quite hard to pick which ones to tell, but I hope you like this selection. Let's start with donkey races. These were a popular attraction in Derbyshire towns during the 19th century. As well as in Belper, there were races at Wirksworth, Bakewell, Ripley and Matlock, sometimes with the rule that the last placed was declared winner, and in Matlock's case with all female jockeys. Traditionally, the Belper one started here at the bottom of the short rows. There was a barrel of beer to win if you were first, and on one occasion, after a donkey refused to budge, its rider took a substantial shortcut to avoid some of the route. But the fastest rider, returning up Long Row and arriving back at the start line, knew very well that no one had passed him, so when he discovered he was second, he picked a fight with the other rider. It was a messy end to the race, and it was decided not to have any more in the town, despite their popularity. Another curious event involving animals was the Clowns vs Elephants football match held in the field next to the Lion Hotel in March 1899. Sadly, there's no known photography of this match, organised by circus owners Lord John Sanger and Sons, but there is this illustration from an advert in the Belper News the week before. A highlight was the penalty shootout between the Elephants' best player and the best player from Belper Town Football Club. Perhaps it's no surprise that by filling the goal so completely when keeper, it was the Elephant that scored more goals. Lord John Sanger's circus was making regular trips to Belper at the time. On each occasion, the elephants and other animals were paraded around the town in scenes you just wouldn't see today. Here, in the marketplace, behind the elephant are a couple of camels. On one occasion, after leaving the marketplace via Church Street, and with the procession stretching out somewhat, a few Belper boys saw their chance at the junction outside St Peter's Church and knocked the elephant's rider off his perch. They tried to grab the elephant and get it to leave the procession going up Chesterfield Road, but the elephant held firm and helped its rider up from where he had fallen in the road. Unable to move it, the boys gave up and ran off, and the elephant and handler rejoined the parade. That's the only known attempt at elephant napping Belper has ever seen, or is ever likely to. The Strutt children, including Arthur, pictured here, had their own animals. Besides ponies and donkeys, they had two monkeys, which for a time were housed in the conservatory, which you can see behind Arthur. Their names were Jack and Jenny, and on one occasion they escaped and caused havoc in the glass house where the peaches were grown. After Herbert Strutt's death in 1928, the family closed up the house and the monkeys were moved to a cage by the boathouse in the river gardens. They escaped from that too. As you'll see from this article, it took a banana in an upturned box to capture the elusive Jenny. They weren't above stealing ice cream off children who got too close either, even when they were in their cage. The land around the old mill dam at the junction of Parkside and Kiln Lane, or Mill Lane as we know it now, was bought by Belper Urban District Council in May 1912 for £145 and became Belper's first recreation ground. Official title for it was Damside Recreation Ground, but it's also known as Walker Bottoms after the path which runs along the Coppice Brook at that point. Things didn't go to plan initially. As it was now public land, some people in the town started using it as a rubbish tip. One favourite summer pastime for children was the damming of the Coppice Brook to provide a paddling pool, as can be seen here in the 1930s. It was cheaper than using Gibfield Lane swimming baths, but the water was colder. Here's an infants class at Long Row School in 1912. The first proper school in the town was in the attic space of the North Mill above the present-day museum. Children worked long hours in the mill most of the time, receiving half a day's schooling each week. Even this was more than most children received in those days. The Strutt family, who owned the mills, were very forward-thinking in ensuring that all their workers, no matter how young, could read, write and have basic numeracy skills. By 1818, it was decided the attic space was not enough, and a school was opened at the bottom of Long Row on the site of an old wood yard. Originally, this had only one teacher, who taught the older children, and then those older children taught the same lesson to the younger ones. You just had to hope the older ones were all listening properly in the first lesson. The Strutt family were very supportive of the school. George Henry Strutt on the left at the top, and his son George Herbert on the right, would go in and teach the boys woodwork and other similar crafts, while his wife Agnes and eldest daughter Susan would go and teach the girls needlework. Agnes and Susan would also visit on Christmas Eve for the last day of term to hand out new clothing to the children. Originally, Belper Marketplace was the village green. George Henry Strutt had it paved in 1881 after it became a muddy mess from overuse. The people of the town then raised money by public subscription to place a memorial on the new stone flags, thanking George Henry for his generosity towards the town. Here it is being installed. The plan was for it to have drinking water pouring from 2 lions' heads into stone bowls below, but for one reason or another it wasn't plumbed in. It's still waiting 140 years later. This was the land once known as Pickles Meadow, to the north of the Belper Mills at the turn of the last century. On the 15th of February 1905, George Herbert Strutt, son of George Henry, was approached by a deputation wishing him to allow them to use the river above the weir for recreational boating. He agreed, and the Belper Boating Association, or BBA, was formed. On the 4th of April, he granted land for a boathouse and gave boating rights to the association for a 3-mile stretch north of the mill weir. The boathouse was built on an island on the east bank of the river, previously used for the growing of osiers, which are a type of willow tree. These were to make baskets for use in the mills. A landing stage was created and paths made through the osiers. On the east side of the island was the mill laid for the first Strutt mill of 1776, and bridges were used to access the site. In July 1905, Belper Boating Association invited the people of Belper to their new boating facility. Tea was dispensed from a stall and 2,500 people attended, some ending up ankle-deep in mud to watch the water carnival. Decorated boats included this large swan boat and another flying the flags of the world. At the opening, George Herbert Strutt suggested the osier bed be transformed into an arboretum, and the river gardens were created. At the end of the event, as the last firework faded and the candles in the lanterns petered out, people realised there was no moon to help them find their way home. The council only had street lamps on in the winter, thinking that anyone up in the darkness of summer must be up to no good, so not deserving of light paid for by the rates. It was pitch black that July night, so the people of Belper formed a crocodile and felt their way back home through the town. It must have taken hours. For the following year, Herbert Strutt paid for a new Swiss tea rooms in the gardens. The original heather roof, emulating the crofts on Strutt's Scottish estate, leaked badly, and it needed a tiled replacement later that year, again paid for by Herbert. Strangely, it wasn't just in the river gardens where you saw boats in the 1930s. Sailing down King Street in front of the Public Hall and Memorial Gardens in June 1931 is the good ship Wild Duck, heading the mile-long Belper Carnival procession. Wild Duck had won the prize for most artistic decorated vehicle, and Neslin Beaver constructed it around his 1927 Austin 7. It involved his young son David sitting on his shoulders, looking through a porthole and telling him where to steer. Perhaps as well, the crowds didn't know. His battleship design for 1932 also involved young David sitting on his shoulders, and it was only in later years, when David became too heavy, that the basic design had to change. Here's the car in question, when it wasn't pretending to be a boat. Other well-supported events in the town include royal celebrations, the earliest to be photographed being Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee in 1887. All businesses were closed for the celebrations, and people descended on the marketplace for a service which included 3,328 Sunday school children, who each received a free tea afterwards. Cannons, bought for the mills many years earlier, were dusted down and gave a royal salute at 8 a.m. on Jubilee Day morning. In the public hall, which is now the Ritz, at noon, over 300 aged people were treated to a feast. Each attendee received a bouquet for their coat or dress. That evening, a sheep was roasted at the Duke of Devonshire public house on Bridge Street, and adults were allowed to have a free slice, with children allowed a free dip of bread in the pan. At 9:30 p.m, a torchlit procession left the railway hotel yard, passing through the streets before finishing on the Chevin at 10 p.m, where a huge bonfire was lit and fireworks set off at 10-minute intervals. People were more patient in those days. Here's the marketplace again after World War I. From Friday the 26th of September 1919, the memorial to George Henry Strutt's generosity was boxed in to create a hardwood temporary memorial in order that the grieving had a focus in the town centre until a proper cenotaph could be built. That Saturday, the memorial was draped in the Union flag, surmounted by laurel leaves. A guard of 4 men, one at each corner, was replaced hourly. Many wreaths and flowers were laid at the memorial. Because of a railway strike, there was a shortage of fine flowers in the town, so many brought garden flowers to lay around the cenotaph. The following day there was a public procession around the streets, then past the memorial, followed by a service in the coppice. The Belper News claimed it was the biggest crowd on record, about 6,000, in the coppice for the service. 2 years later, the paddock on King Street belonging to Green Hall was given to the town by the Strutts for a memorial garden to be created and a permanent cenotaph erected. Green Hall, roughly where the Greenhouse pub is now, but set further back from the street, had originally been the home of Jedediah Strutt II, grandson of the first Jedediah, who built the first of the cotton mills down by Belper Bridge. Jedediah wanted to live in the middle of the town, but it was a tight fit, so the paddock was on the opposite side of the road, and the garden by the house was extended out onto the rooftops of the neighbouring buildings. Here, in the 1890s, booths and ricers' shops were still operating below the gardens. You have to wonder if they were troubled with damp. In 1832, Jedediah was delighted when the Great Reform Act was passed, and he decided on a huge garden party in the paddock to celebrate. But how to get all the food and other supplies over from the house without taking them across a busy King Street? The answer was a temporary footbridge, a feature that Jedediah liked so much he had it rebuilt to become a more permanent feature, a bridge over King Street. After Jedediah's death, the house became a prep school for boys, and in 1867 the decision was made to demolish the bridge. Perhaps after 35 years it wasn't in the best of condition, and the idea of schoolboys using it as a shortcut to their tennis lawn in the paddock was felt to be not a good idea. The school had closed by the start of the First World War, and Green Hall became a Red Cross hospital for wounded soldiers. Thousands were treated during the course of the war. This was the operating theatre, kept ready for emergencies. It was rarely used, but if trench foot failed to improve, then a local doctor would be called in to remove it. Tin pails with Belper written on the lids were provided so that the removed limb could be studied back at Central HQ to help in understanding the condition. One of the highlights of the Bank Holiday Monday in August 1914, the last day before World War I broke out, was on Derwent Street, where the biggest tented exhibition on earth was visiting Belper. These men had been in the town advertising its arrival in the weeks before to make sure that there would be large crowds wanting to see the shows and displays. Previously seen by King George V and Queen Mary and called Wild Australia, it included a pageant of the finest horsemen in the world and whip cracking with a 60-foot whip. There was kangaroo boxing and a kangaroo chase, as well as tips on how to handle a crocodile and a reenactment of a famous 1862 Australian robbery called Sticking Up the Gold Escort. There were 2 performances in the day, and tickets for the whole show ranged from 6p to 5 shillings. During the war, Belperman Sergeant Henry John Spacey of the Sherwood Foresters received a Distinguished Conduct Medal. In July 1916 he was wounded in the hand, face and throat. A German bullet sliced through his Adam's apple. Sent back to England, he finally returned home to Foundry, now Bexich Lane, on 10 days' leave in the October. His family decorated the street for his arrival home. After the war, Henry decided to emigrate, moving to Hollywood, USA in 1920. Despite his injuries, he later appeared as an extra in many films screened in Belper cinemas, up until his death at the end of 1939. For many years, friends and relations would be looking beyond the film stars, seeking out his familiar face amongst the wider cast. Belper's first railway station was opened in 1840, but it was a long way out of town. To reach town after arriving at the station, you needed to get out pretty sharpish and take this shuttle carriage to the Lion Hotel. If you missed that, it was a long trek into town, particularly if you had a suitcase, as happened to the local vicar on one occasion. Finally, in 1878, the opportunity arose to demolish an old milk house and build a new station in town. The first station became a goods station near to where Goods Road is today. And this was Belper's second station, seen shortly after completion with immaculate cut lawns, white picket fencing and gas lamps along the platforms. A fire was kept lit on chilly winter nights in one of the men's waiting rooms for those who found themselves without a roof over their heads, a more agreeable alternative to the stringently run Belper Workhouse. In the 19th century, there were many dressings in the town for Wakes Week, not just wells but taps as well, and grand arches over the main streets. As you can see from this photograph, it was something of a male activity. Unfortunately, towards the end of the century, rivalry between groups, particularly with cash prizes at stake, led to sabotage and fights, so well-dressing was banned for all but the nuns at the St. Lawrence Convent for several decades. A more civilised entertainment in the 20th century, bar the odd thrown monkey nut, was the Palace Cinema. The palace was built on the site of the Rose and Crown stables in 1912 by Thomas Morley. When he issued tenders for the building work in the Belper News, he described his vision for an electric palace of varieties, with its own generator running around the back of the building. For a time, both the palace and the Ritz at the top of King Street had the same owner, and films were shown at the Ritz before a runner dashed down with it for the audience in the palace. Usually that all worked fine, but occasionally hold-ups, particularly during the longer two-reel films, could see the Palace Auditorium hosting rowdy renditions of Why Are We Waiting until the film restarted. Here's the Palace in its final year before closure early in 1963. On October the 8th, 1963, a large crowd gathered for the opening of Belper's first supermarket, Fine Fare, on the site of the Palace. Crowds were gathering early, and worried about the turnout, police were called out from as far as Chesterfield to help deal with the numbers. By 10 a.m, hundreds of shoppers had assembled for the Dagenham Girl Piper's arrival. Pipe Major Peggy Iris opened the store before the crowd surged inside. Fine Fare had to bring in lorries full of fresh stock as the shelves rapidly emptied. No wonder, with a free pack of peas with each box of frozen fish cakes. But everyone behaved themselves. No riot for the police to worry about at all. This photograph, taken on Salts Meadow down Derwent Street, shows a hot air balloon taking off in the 1890s. Some 40 years or so earlier, on the festival field, which became Albert Street, what is believed to have been planned as the first advertised manned flight from Belper was due to take place. The balloon owner set up and filled his balloon with hot air, but when the time came for takeoff, the balloon, basket and owner stayed where they were. Putting this down to bad air, the man climbed out of his basket, not realising that no one was holding on to it anymore. It shot up in the air, and he had to borrow a horse and chase after his balloon as it headed over the Chevin, heading towards Ashbourne, near to where he eventually found it in a field. But the first ever known balloon to leave Belper was another 40 years earlier than that. In the summer of 1814, to celebrate the birthday of the Prince Regent, later George IV, on the 12th of August, an unnamed Belper man, described as a poor man in a newspaper report, had created his own balloon. A Derby gentleman offered to pay him a significant sum so that it could be part of Derby's revelries, but he refused the money. Instead, in the attached basket, he placed a joint of the finest roasted beef, and watched by a cheering crowd, this was launched into the sky. A letter accompanied the beef, stating the time and occasion of its being sent up, and requesting that whoever found it give notice to the Belper man. A letter was received the following Tuesday by post stating that the balloon fell in a field near Malden in Essex, where some mowers were at work. The beef was eaten, and the gentleman who read the letter for them treated the mowers with good British beer, in which they drank to the loyal donors of the beef with 3 hearty huzzas. The balloon travelled nearly 200 miles in just over 3 hours. There are many more stories about Belper. You'll find more on my YouTube channel, and I'd just like to say thank you to Belper Historical Society, to Richard Fletcher, Malcolm Neame and David Beaver for their help in providing visuals for these particular tales about Belper. As I said at the start, our wonderful town is packed full of stories. Thanks for watching.